Season 1 of The Simpsons is intriguing. It's easy to write this season off as a work in progress. All of the pieces are there, but the show still hasn't found its feet. While I did find this to be the case in a lot of aspects, this season surprised me with the risks it takes and has far more hits than I feel it's given credit for, with many choosing to just focus on its misses. Before reviewing this season for these rankings, I expected to find a mixed bag, with some episodes I'd like and others that I truly dislike. However, while there are certainly elements of the season that I found questionable, I can say that there isn't actually an episode that I truly dislike in its entirety. Though there were certainly episodes that I felt lacked in substance or weren't executed to the potential of the concept. With that all said, here is Season 1 of The Simpsons ranked best to worst to best. Number 13, Homer's Night Out. This episode's fine. I enjoy the opening scene with Homer and Marge. I like the Where's My Spy camera exchange because, we don't get many postal workers on The Simpsons. I for some reason really enjoy the beautiful relationship between Eugene and his father and how mortified they are by the exotic dancer's presence destroying the good Christian vibes of his party. That's about it. The opening act is quite strong, with good dialogue and solid pacing, and then it just kinda carries on. The majority of the episode after Bart takes the picture just falls flat. I understand the reason for Marge's anger, though I feel it's exaggerated for the sake of progressing the narrative and to aid the message that the episode is trying to convey. The message the episode strives for is a good one. It was not bad. I just feel the storytelling wasn't quite there. However, I will say the standout scene for me in this episode is Mr. Burns calling Homer into his office, having a go at him over the photo, before then asking Smithers to leave and proceeding to beg Homer for help with his love life, which Homer confusingly and somewhat accidentally obliges. A delighted Burns then thanks Homer and says he may now leave, but asks that he speaks of this encounter to no one. Homer's Night Out is not a bad episode, it just falls down partially due to its dedication to conveying its message that it sacrifices the rationality of Marge's character judgment, and leaves the episode on a bit of a crawl to the finish. Though I will admit it finishes on a wholesome note with a good message. I just wish the episode that surrounded it was stronger. Number 12, There's No Disgrace Like Home. This episode has it all. An opening at Mr. Burns' banging employee picnic, an exploration of The Simpsons' almost chaotic family dynamic, and Dr. Marvin Monfucking-Rowe! So why is this episode so dull? I don't get it. If you told me there was an episode that started with a party at Castle de Burns and a sequence in which the Simpsons beat and shock the ever-loving shit out of each other, I'd feel assured that regardless of quality, it would be anything but boring. But here we are, an episode that I genuinely had to keep reminding myself to pay attention to. Though I do have to say I like the scene where Homer pawns the TV for the family's therapy session. It's a nice display of selflessness from Homer, and I feel it's conveyed very well and it sets the episode up for a wholesome conclusion. There's No Disgrace Like Home is by no means a bad episode, but Jesus Christ is it by no means a good one. Although I will say the last 4 minutes I do quite enjoy. Shocking, I know. Number 11, Crepes of Wrath. This episode's weird. On paper, it's got a lot going for it. And it's not that it doesn't execute its concept to a serviceable level, it's just more of a case of the episode's choice of toning and direction feels off. I mean, it's like having bread, cheese, and ham in front of you, and you use it to make a soup. It's not a necessarily bad decision, it's just really odd that you chose to make a soup. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, my favourite aspects of this episode are mostly during the first act. So let's dive in. The opening of Homer tripping over Bart's skateboard, falling down the stairs and being floor-bound for the majority of the day while a Krusty doll repeats the same phrase every other second would be almost haunting if it wasn't for Homer's brilliant delivery of "The boy, bring me the boy," after being discovered on the floor by Lisa and Marge. Can I just say, Purple Suit Skinner is best Skinner. His mum treats him with respect and acknowledges him as the accomplished headmaster he is. Power! Now the thing is, I always remember the cherry bomb prank being a funnier, bigger moment, but to be honest, hearing Skinner's mother's frail cry after falling victim to said prank is just kinda making me feel a bit sad. The real delight of this episode is Skinner and Homer's bonding over the idea of being rid of Bart for 3 months. Now we get to the meat of the matter. You see, I always remembered loving the idea of this episode. Bart goes to France! What a delight! But God, this is just a bit sad. In terms of the side plot with Bart's replacement, I enjoy Lisa and Adil's big political debate, which is very well intermediated by a surprisingly well-informed Homer. The rest just kind of exists. I mean, it's not bad, by any means. It's just that once you've watched it once and get the whole spy shtick, it doesn't really have much to offer in terms of substance. I mean, I enjoy it. It's there. Now, in terms of the main plot, I want to like it. I really do. But watching Bart suffer in poor living conditions, enduring unpaid labour, getting verbally abused by criminals, slowly falling ill, and then getting served literal antifreeze isn't going to be saved by Bart magically learning French and returning home wearing a beret and carrying a couple of bags of baguettes! I do want to like this police officer scene. It looks nice and it serves as the episode's pivotal moment. I just wish that what preceded it wasn't so unnecessarily unpleasant, and there was more of a journey to Bart's victory, rather than a few weeks of abuse around French speakers equals sudden complete subconscious language comprehension. I do like the ending though. It's a nice father-son moment that the episode really needed in order to end strong. In conclusion, I want to love Crepes of Wrath, but unfortunately due to how much the episode tries to do and how it executes its concept, it just lands more misses than hits for me. Though I still do find myself always leaning to this one when reminiscing on season 1 episodes, just for how outside the box it does attempt to go. Number 10, Some Enchanted Evening. This episode's unpleasant. I don't want to see Marge ringing up a radio therapist crying over issues with Homer. I mean, these are issues that become staples of Homer's character. Therefore, this just paints the picture that Marge is just going through a lot more internal suffering than we as an audience would likely want to believe. A big issue I take with season 1 in general is how Marge's character is handled. Despite this season containing some of her best moments, it just feels like her character becomes whatever the writers need her to be in that given moment. If Marge needs to be mad, then Marge is mad. And very little is given to justify that. When Homer enters the door, Marge drops her anger immediately. Now this could be seen as a nice moment of realization of, hey, I do love the Homer, but to me it just comes across as, hey, Marge doesn't need to be mad anymore. Marge, you didn't... As much as I am not keen on the opening act, it's the babysitter plot that I take real issue with. A plot about Bart and Lisa overthrowing an evil babysitter has so much Home Alone shenanigans potential, and it is that for the last 30 seconds, sure. But until then, it's just the kids having a boring/miserable time before being tied up, and at what point are we just watching child abuse on our screens? Though I do enjoy Lisa's knowledge of the happy little elf's lore, how the watching of a crime show sets up and interweaves itself into the evil babysitter plot, and... okay, maybe I do like this one a little bit more than I remembered. But you know what I definitely do like a lot? Homer and Marge have an absolutely banging day. Homer splashed out. You cannot tell me that this man does not have game! Also, in hindsight, I don't mind the babysitter. She's played well and comes across as an intimidating figure, and that scene of her pulling Lisa out from under the table is actually quite chilling on a rewatch. I really wasn't looking forward to this one. I saved it till last. I even wondered if I remembered it well enough to just justify ranking it at the bottom without going through the hassle of rewatching. However, I'm glad I did, because this genuinely, apart from the first act, I don't actually dislike this. The babysitter stuff isn't as unpleasant as I remembered and makes for a compelling watch at times. I'm not a big fan of Homer mistakenly releasing the babysitter by the end, but it's an intentional punch to the gut and it's exactly what I would expect from The Simpsons. So I can't be mad at it, especially when Homer is rocking a jacket of this caliber. Also, Series 1 really likes to hammer in these sweet as sugar wholesome endings. In conclusion, this episode exists, and I'm okay with that. Number 9. Call of Simps. This episode surprised me. The opening act of this episode was a lot stronger than I remembered. I actually adore this salesman character, and I actually now find myself cursing the show for not using him more frequently. It's also nice to see an episode that takes place for the most part away from the main locations that we're used to seeing in the show. It makes for a nice detour from the rest of the season. This episode separates the family into 2 groups and 1 Maggie, to give focus to the father and son and mother and daughter dynamic, giving us an enjoyable contrast with Homer and Bart suffering in the wild and Marge and Lisa coping with relative ease. Also, Maggie just goes off and becomes leader of the Bears. Now this might be a slightly unpopular opinion, but I've always found the Bigfoot aspect of the episode to just feel a bit too silly. I'm not saying the Simpsons world can't pull off a plot like this, but it just borders on assuming that all the Springfield reporters are fucking idiots. Though I will admit Marge's quotes to the paparazzi being immediately printed as newspaper headlines in this montage sequence is very funny. I also enjoy that when Homer is completely cleaned up and is able to speak, the answer to whether he is Bigfoot is still left inconclusive, leading to a very nice wrap-up scene between Homer and Marge. This episode did indeed surprise me. I found a lot more to like in this episode than I expected. Enough to pop it in the top half of the list? Maybe not, but is it still worth your time? I think so. Listen, alright? Listen. You're not listening? Listen. Homer's Odyssey. It's hated. I get it. I do understand. It's miserable, depressing, all of the toning is off. I don't even know what they were thinking with this line delivery. But I'm sorry, I have time for this. I see this episode as a risk that didn't stick the landing, but I like it. For some reason. I just find this period of The Simpsons so interesting. When the show reaches the seasons 3 to 8 era, you'd be forgiven for assuming that the show that gave us Mr. Plow and Homer the Great didn't at one point dedicate half an episode to Homer wanting to commit literal self. And I just think it's neat that that was a thing that they did. This is an episode that I firmly believe can only exist in season 1 of The Simpsons. The toning is so off. The neighbours, who appear a total of amount of times, not only immediately clock on to what is going on, but have a jolly giggle about it. It's not funny. It's not a good part of the episode. I'm not trying to make a good point here, but it's just so weird. And again, this line is so underplayed in its delivery that it might be the most I laughed during the entire season. I am just fascinated by this episode. From its conception to its more than questionable execution, it's an episode that could only exist inside this weirdly warped time capsule that is season 1 of The Simpsons. I could talk about this episode for ages. I could give it its own video. This is so good! I will, however, finish this section by touching on some of the episode's more shining elements. The Homer making positive change narrative is handled well, and my only real complaint is its montage-like pacing and rushed conclusion. However, I feel the pieces are there, and if this element of the episode just had more time to work with, it had potential to possibly shine. I mean, the first 8 minutes are dedicated to Homer's firing, the following 7 are dedicated to his depression and suicide attempt, leaving less than a third of the episode's runtime left to dedicate to the positive change narrative. Another positive I found while viewing this episode is, regardless of how quickly it's passed over, Homer actually comes across possibly the most competent he would around Mr. Burns, other than when he's oblivious to his behaviour as pointing a gun to his head or punching him in the face. The episode also manages to interject some humour, such as the oiling of the gate and the fact the original life dedication goal that stopped Homer committing suicide is solved instantly in the next scene. Look, I know I'm clutching at straws here. I don't know why I'm fighting for this episode so much. Somebody just fucking slap me. To conclude, Homer's Odyssey is possibly the weirdest and most surreal episode of The Simpsons, to the point where I found myself rooting for it during my deliberation over this ranking. On a quality level, you could easily be forgiven, and probably even seen as correct, for ranking this episode at the very bottom of the season. But for some reason, I find myself drawn to it, and if I was doing this list without rationality, and my only reasoning was, I dig it, this episode would actually be in my top 5, without question. However, examining the season on a whole made it very clear that intrigue, risk, and personal bias can only push an episode this far. Why am I mad this isn't in my top 5? Number 7, Bart the Genius. Alright, no listen. This episode always tends to fall middle of the pack for me on rewatch. Controversial, I know. But get this. I actually rewatched this a second time, because I was so unsure of its placement, and before that second viewing, it was below Homer's Odyssey. So be grateful that you're living in this timeline. While I enjoy this episode's concept, I always find it to lack in its execution. This episode touches on the relationship between Bart and Homer, which it handles very well, and to be honest, I wish the episode was mostly about this aspect, as I've never found myself drawn into the smart school portion of the plot. You can see where it's going, which isn't normally an issue, especially with early Simpsons, but with the substance within these scenes lacking, I just find myself kind of waiting for the liar reveal trope to kick in. While I don't find anything to particularly dislike with Bart the Genius, I just find there's nothing much I can praise it for either. Besides the small doses of Homer and Bart's relationship. I mean, if that aspect got more focused, this episode would likely move up at least a spot or two. Though I do have to say this train sequence is dope. I also enjoy just how much of a literal dick Martin is in this. Also, can Skinner please rock the purple suit more? I just find it interesting that while so many characters are still a work in progress at this point, Skinner appears very close to being almost fully realised. In fact, I'm kind of finding myself almost preferring the no-nonsense veteran we get in the first few seasons, before he started to become more layered when his ties to his mother, Chalmers and Edna started to play into his character progression. I feel this episode would hit harder if it stuck in one direction and just ran with it. With the episode trying to explore Bart's feelings of inadequacy within his new school, his relationship with Homer, and his feelings of dishonesty, it's all just a bit too much for 22 minutes. If this episode was made outside of season 1, I could see it slapping much, much harder, but as it stands, it just feels a little half-baked. There's not much time given to the development of these new characters or this new environment, and you don't get much insight into Bart's inner turmoil with his dishonesty. I was, however, hopeful that the ending would stick the landing and give us a solid conclusion to the father-son aspect of the narrative, which I'll admit it starts off strong with Bart letting his guard down and opening up to Homer, but in the end the scene just concludes with a quick laugh when it could have been so much more. However, I can't deny it is a very Simpsons ending. Bart the Genius is a beloved episode by many and is considered an early season classic. As for my views on it, I like it just fine. Solid 6, Bart the General. Ooh, we're cooking with gas now! Nelson episodes are a treat, and this episode introduces him as a looming obstacle that Bart must overcome, a role which he plays brilliantly from start to finish. Also, can I please draw your attention once again to how much of an absolute boss Season 1 Skinner is. Nelson telling Bart that he'll get him after school, and Skinner then rushing Bart to class confirming, no, he'll get you after school. This is what peak performance looks like. I also love the roles that Homer and Marge play in this episode, with Homer taking the stand up for yourself approach and Marge taking the be the bigger person and reach out approach. Both of these approaches, while well-meaning, don't do the job, thus allowing Grandpa to take centre stage for all of 40 seconds and recruit Herman as Bart's literal war declarer. I like Herman. What happened to Herman? Can we get Herman back? The montage of Bart training his army is always an absolute joy. I love the visuals, especially this orange silhouetted one. The music is hype and makes me feel engaged in the build up to this battle. I am genuinely beyond hyped for the full-on war that Bart is about to declare on this 10-year-old child. While I do enjoy the battle sequence itself, it's the only time the episode makes me wish it was in a later season, just as the scope feels slightly underwhelming. Overall, this episode serves as a great introduction to Nelson and is a fun episode that I always enjoy on rewatch. Do I feel there are aspects that could have been better? Yes. But that doesn't mean what we got isn't good. Number 5, The Telltale Hat. What an absolute treat of an episode. We have something real beauty here. The opening chase sequence is beautifully done, especially for season 1. I love this gag when Bart is asked how long his story is going to take, and he replies with the exact actual length of time the story takes up in the episode. I love everything about this church scene, from Homer's outburst to the Sunday school teacher's torment at the unrelenting questions asked by the children. Also, the fact that the opening to the scene is used in the most viewed Simpson wave on YouTube also helps. You gotta get those vibes! You know, this might be the most interaction we ever see between Bart and the three bullies that are not Nelson. So I appreciate these scenes for that, and also the setup they provide for Bart's beheading of the statue, even if they don't offer much in the way of humour. I adore how much the beheading of the statue affects the town. I love how even Mr. Burns is driven to tears over this tragedy. It truly is the worst thing that's ever happened. The build up to the climax is very well done. I love that once Bart sees that the bullies are also saddened by the statue's beheading, he truly realises that he did it all for nothing and confesses to his family. Homer, realising he is partially the cause of Bart doing this because of some bad advice he gave him the night before, decides to help Bart do the right thing, which is hilariously cut off by the angry mob from the beginning of the episode, leading to a nice speech by Bart on the reattachment of the head, concluding the episode on a wholesome note. I thoroughly enjoy this episode from start to finish, to the point where it's almost difficult to critique this one. It's just very, very solid from start to finish. It's a solid, engaging narrative, great performances from the main and side characters, brilliant toning, and at times beautiful animation. Number 4, Simpsons roasting on an open fire. This episode does a fantastic job in showcasing what The Simpsons would become. Though this episode's tone is quite downbeat for the majority, it ends on an incredibly wholesome note that encapsulates what The Simpsons truly is. Homer's money struggles are relatable and well implemented into the story, with money worries becoming a common theme for the show's early seasons. Except for the occasions when it wouldn't be irrelevant plot points, they could just randomly give Homer large amounts of cash without question. While a lot of episodes on this list can feel a tad dated on rewatch, this episode still hits for me every time. The narrative is relatable and well written, the toning is conveyed through strong character moments and cinematography, and despite Lisa not getting much of a role, she has possibly the funniest moment in the episode. I'm not saying this can stand up to later episodes in terms of its humour, or the intrigue of its visuals, but in terms of its story elements, it holds up very well. And its ending can go toe to toe with most for wholesome sentiment. And I feel very few other episodes can match just how much this ending embodies what is truly so lovable about this cartoon family. Simpsons roasting on an open fire is a timeless classic, and it deserves far more respect than it gets. Number 3, Krusty gets busted. This episode blows me away every time I watch it. It's funny, emotional, has the highest stakes of an episode so far, and features the debut of my personal favourite character and guest star that the show has ever casted. I always reflected on this episode being high quality, but I never took the time to see the value in the mystery it conveys. Season 3's Black Widower sets up a solvable mystery, but the clues feel slightly out of place at times, and can be easy to spot. But Krusty Gets Busted sets up a solvable mystery with well-placed clues that are only easy to spot if you're looking for them. The subtlety of the small feet line linked with the previous moment of Homer stepping on the robber's foot, the looking at the magazine followed by the revelation that Krusty's illiterate, everything is woven into the episode in a way where it's easy to spot, but it's also easy to miss, with none of these moments feeling out of place or shoehorned in for the purpose of the mystery. The episode's narrative flows seamlessly, making for an intriguing and engaging story from start to finish. I haven't even touched upon the vocal delivery of my man, Sideshow Bob. Kelsey Grammer cements himself from the very beginning as an absolute standout. Any episode in which Sideshow Bob appears is always enhanced by Kelsey's performance, and this episode is no exception. Sideshow Bob is portrayed as a character of intelligence, a man of culture if you will, with strong likability to the extent that it's not hard to see how he was able to fool the majority of the show's characters, thus making the moment that Bart catches him out all the more satisfying. Bob's motivations are both comical and in keeping with his dignified character. Bart also gets a lot of time to shine in this episode, with his unwillingness to accept the proposed truth about his former idol and his willingness to do anything to prove his innocence. I also enjoy Lisa's incorporation into the plot of just instantly pointing out all of the clues that have evaded the Springfield police force. Krusty Gets Busted is an absolutely phenomenal episode, and makes you ponder the question, is this really a Season 1 episode? Number 2, Life on the Fast Lane. This episode is fantastic. We have something real beauty here. In a season that falls victim to trying to deliver too much and falling short, this episode is the definition of taking a simple narrative and elevating it to S-tier level. The story focuses on Homer getting Marge an ill-thought birthday gift that she uses out of spite, knowing that Homer got it with himself in mind. She then meets Jack and finds herself caught between a faltering relationship and a blossoming one that eventually leads to an ultimatum. This episode puts the majority of its focus on developing these two relationships to the point where you could be forgiven for siding with Marge on choosing either choice by the end of it. Not to mention that this episode is jam-packed with comedy. It looks lovely, especially for Season 1. Marge's chemistry with Jonk is strong. Juke himself, while clearly falling for Marge, is never characterised in a dislikable manner. I especially like the scene where Bitch attempts to expose Marge as being unfaithful, and Jank immediately covers for her. I do enjoy Jink. He has charisma, and I will never not laugh at this line delivery. 4 onion rings! Having Jonk be such a strong presence makes us as an audience feel conflicted, as while I obviously want Homer and Marge to work things out, I can't help but feel that Marge could forge a nice life for herself with Jonk. This episode really puts us in Marge's shoes, and we sympathise with her position. Homer's role, while more muted after the first act, is handled well, and his small scenes help to convey the silent struggle he is going through, especially the scene where he finds the glove that Jonks gifted Marge, and he puts it back in the drawer and closes it without saying a single word, knowing his marriage is in danger, but not knowing how to fix it, which makes the conclusion hit even stronger. By the way, this dance scene is absolutely gorgeous. Also, the kids' scenes range from hilarious to genuinely heartwarming, with Lisa accepting the faulting of her parents' marriage, while Bart remains firmly in denial until he attempts to give Homer a pep talk and aid his situation. Life in the Fast Lane is well written and well executed. It's emotional, it's funny, with great character depth and dialogue, and its ending never fails to make me emotional. It is, in my opinion, a masterpiece, and if I could show people only one episode from Series 1, it would be this one. Number 1. Moaning Lisa. I got a lot to say here, so I'm just gonna start from the beginning. This is one of my favourite episodes. The opening morning routine is brilliantly paced and wonderfully cut. This opening act perfectly showcases Lisa's feelings of loneliness and inadequacy, conveyed by her inability to excel in her music class due to the silencing by her teacher, due to her outshining the other students, and thinking outside the box, being a free thinker, all of that millennial Gen Z bullshit. This episode makes a great attempt to explore the theme of depression and general inner turmoil. And while it doesn't go as far as episodes like Homer's Odyssey, probably a good thing, it finds a very good middle ground. Scenes such as Homer coming upstairs to tell Lisa to keep her saxophone playing down, before seeing the emotion on her face and lovingly telling her she can play it as loud as she fucking wants. I also love how Marge uses her mother's teaching to genuinely try and help Lisa to the best of her abilities, however faulted the advice may be, leading to one of my favourite Marge moments in the show, where Marge finally realises what advice Lisa truly needs and speaks not from what she's been taught, but what she knows her daughter needs to hear and what Marge truly believes in her heart. The line, "I'll do the smiling for the both of us," and telling Lisa it's okay to be sad, may be the best singular moment Marge gets all season, and considering this is the same season that contains Life on the Fast Lane, that is no small boast. Now, I love everything about the Balloon Gums Murphys scene. The beautiful shot of the moon and the bridge, the music, the narrative conveyance, it's just so It's perfect. This is one of my favourite scenes in the show's history and would make my top 5 Lisa moments from the entire show easily, without question. I also love the realism in Marge's reaction to seeing her daughter playing jazz with a stranger in the dead of night in a large city. The serious tone of Lisa's plot is countered perfectly by the sheer fun that is Homer and Bart's video game B-plot. Homer can't beat Bart in a fighting game, so seeks outside help to train and finally best him. That's it. That's the B-plot, and it's glorious. It's exactly what this episode needs. A plot of pure nonsensical fun to balance out the more somber tone of the rest of the episode. I will, however, say that I do feel just as much anguish as Homer at the plot's conclusion, but I feel that was the intention. Moaning Lisa isn't just the best episode of Season 1, it is also one of the best episodes of The Simpsons in general. And if you haven't seen it, why are you watching this? So that's my list. As you can see, I actually found myself pleasantly surprised by the season. Yes, it's still the show's early days and it shows for a lot of the episodes. Yes, I feel a few episodes are outshined by episodes to come in later seasons, but I found myself truly falling in love with this season. It's highly underrated. People don't give it its kudos. Where are its kudos? And I think you can all agree with me on its shining standout element. Principal fucking Seymour Skinner. My man's donning that purple suit swagger, spitting out one-liners, and being an absolute star boss son. Season 1 of The Simpsons has its stains, but scrub them down and you get a slightly cleaner shirt. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, feel free to join me in the next one where I preach to you all the good word of our Lord and Saviour, Season 2. Goodbye, and I'll see you at some point.
Bart's people just think our veterans deserve a little recognition. If I'm guilty of anything, maybe it's caring too much. I'm Bart Simpson.